I'm the bad guy. I'm the bad.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Across the Gridiron. I am Matt and I am here once again to break down the Wildcard Weekend in the NFL with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Eddie Equo. Eddie, Wildcard Weekend was, well, wild. But first of all, how are you, my friend? How are you getting on?
I'm doing well. It was like you said, it was wild. Absolutely. It felt like every game was testing something, it was either testing the quarterback or testing the coach adaptability or just testing the team ability to fall off a cliff. It was just amazing. But yeah, I'm doing well. This is the time of the year where football gets really serious. It means something now, because it's like win or go home, right? So you kind of watch every game with all the excitement. And of course, when your team is not there, it's a lot easier to watch. It's a lot easier to kind of take in all the swings. You genuinely, enjoy good play, or you're like, okay, what the heck was that? Sort of thing.
Well, I'll go say one of these games, you're saying, every game tested something. Well, one of these games tested my ability to stay awake, and that was just during the highlight package that I watched this morning. But we'll come on to that probably towards the end. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you say it. You've got nothing riding on it, so there's pressure. There's predictions going on here, Eddie. There's a lot riding on this Across the Gridiron.
There is.
I mean, I didn't partake in the predictions episode last week because I was suffering from the plague, as it turned out. But Mrs. called it a case of man flu. But I think I nearly died. So I didn't partake in our predictions episode, but I saw what you predicted. So I was watching this game. I was so rooting for the Eagles. I was so rooting for the Bears because I just want to make sure. Because I don't just want to beat you, Eddie. I want to embarrass you, right? But we'll come on to our predictions in another video later this week. So just for clarity for those watching, listening, if you are, first of all, thank you. We are recording this on a Monday night here in the UK, a good 2 or 3 hours before the Steelers and the Texans kick off, right? So we are not going to be reviewing that game. We're going to review that when we do our divisional game predictions later in the week. So for now, let's just assume that the Texans won because that's who I predicted would win, right? But what we're going to do is we'll break down some of the key themes of each game in the Wildcard Weekend so far, the first 5 games that have happened, because lots and lots of talking points in this, and we're going to do them in order because why the hell not? And it also means that we could just maybe touch on our Patriots and Chargers right at the end because my God, that was tough to watch. But let's start on what everybody thought in every predictions. This was the most obvious blowout game that was going to happen in the whole Wildcard Weekend.
Yeah,
which was the LA Rams at the Panthers. Everyone predicted Rams would win. Rams did win, but bloody hell, it was harder work than a lot of us expected. It finished 34-31. This was back and forth, blow by blow game, and Panthers put in a hell of an effort, but ultimately the Rams came through. So, Eddie, obviously, what did you make of this one?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if the Panthers had won this game, they would have been worthy winners. They definitely put on a show, and sometimes it does make a difference when you play a team in the regular season, right? Because everyone talks about, how many times you play a team do you actually get over them in terms of what the result was previously. And normally, like, especially for divisional opponents, so if you play them in the season, and let's say, you win them, you beat them twice, there's always the likelihood that the third time you meet, you're not going to do that, right? They're probably going to beat you. There is all kinds of things that are now being corrected and all of that, and they're laser focused, on this. But when you play a team once and you lose to them and you have no opportunity to, kind of fix that in season, and the next time that you meet, it actually counts for something. It could only be the reason why the Panthers had so much confidence in this game. They did not have any sort of inferiority complex about playing the Rams. You're looking over the other side and you're seeing, Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, people that are all pros and all of that. And you're looking at the Panthers and they've got Bryce Young and they've got Rico Dowdle and they've got, a couple of people that you might not even remember, if they mention their names, you don't even know what team they're playing. But that defense showed up in the game in spots, right? Because you kind of look at it and say, well, it was 30-something, but did the defense actually show up? But it showed up in spots. The offense just seemed like they were all on supercharge mode. I mean, Bryce Young, just looked like a different quarterback. And we're going to talk about, the consequences of what this is in other shows about, Bryce Young, and because he is coming up for a contract renewal soon, what that means for the Panthers. But I think this game, was exactly what you want to see in a game that matters. It was so close. Everything came down to the fourth quarter. And honestly, it came down to a play. it really did, and that play just swinging in a different direction. The Panthers could have won this game. So I think the Rams will know that they've been in a game, right? And they would be looking at themselves and saying, whew, we narrowly escaped that one. And there's going to be tougher tests, ahead, because I think the one thing, not just in this game, and we'll talk about the other games, but the one thing was that it didn't seem like there were teams that were superior to the other. It didn't look like there was a massive gap between the teams, at all throughout the Wildcard. So it's either there are a bunch of average teams playing, or certain teams have really leveled up, their play, going into the postseason. But I mean, I love what I saw. Puka Nacua did what he normally does. He was excellent. Rico Dowdle. I mean, all the stars performed. Right. This wasn't one of the games where you kind of look back and say, "Oh, no, this one didn't pull their weight." Everyone pulled their weight in this game, and whoever lost is just going to be unfortunate because there can only be one person to win.
Yeah, and I think that if you the one thing I'm going to discount from this is actually the seedings going into it, because obviously I know the Panthers came in as 4th seed and so on and so forth. But look, ultimately, you had one team who a lot of people were fancying to be 1st seed, and potentially who I've personally backed as going to Super Bowl in the NFC, against a team with a losing record, right? But again, if you just looked at this without knowing any of that, you would not think that there was that difference in their regular season scores. Panthers gave as good as they got. Bryce Young, yeah, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 264 yards. He looked like he belonged, I think, in that, but he had a lot of supporting cast around him. And you're right, I think it's going to be a really interesting decision to see what happens with him. Panthers will have a decision to make, if they keep him or if they, look for somebody else in an upcoming draft and maybe trade Bryce Young away, because he's going to want to get paid. Puka Nacua, though, I'm glad you called him out because he was absolutely immense. He was the go-to guy for Stafford. 10 receptions, 111 yards, 1 touchdown. He was almost unplayable at times. The one person I want to give a particular shout out to, if I could just remember his first name, which is Colby Parkinson. Again, yeah. When it came to the clutch times, he wasn't targeted that often. But Stafford, when it came to it, a few seconds left on the clock, he knew that we can put the ball in Parkinson's hands and get game-winning touchdown. And look, Stafford, we know, is an exceptional quarterback, and we know that he is someone who can lead a team to a Super Bowl. But I think just that kind of that ability, that sort of drive at the end to say, no, right, we need this. We talked this a lot about with Josh Allen, but I think it's the same with Stafford. You know, he had the ball in his hands. You felt, yeah, there's a chance they can win this. Even after the Panthers went up with, what was it, 2 minutes left? I think when they took the lead.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, 2 minutes, 30.
Change, yeah.
Yeah, 2:39. So again, for the tape people who don't know, Bryce Young, the Panthers went forward, got a touchdown with 2:39 left. That made it 31-27. So they've got 2 minutes plus a 2-minute warning and a couple of timeouts to drive down the field, and that's exactly what they did. Stafford drove it down the field, catch made by Parkinson for a 19-yard touchdown with 38 seconds left. Right, that is clutch play, and there are going to be games in the playoffs that are tight. No one thought the Panthers would bring as much fight as they did, but the Rams saw it out, and they go forward. But just to reiterate what you said, fair play to Carolina. They were the underdogs. They went into the game as underdogs, but they gave as good as they got, and I think they made a really good account of themselves. So everyone in that organization should be proud of their season.
Yeah, they did. They absolutely did. And it wasn't a team that was like, oh, we made it to the dance, let's just admire the view, sort of thing.
I'm so glad to be invited to the party. I'm going to stand in the corner.
Stand in the corner and just watch people dance,
Mm-hmm. That's what I did for most of the time. Stand in the corner, holding a drink and just watching.
I was going to say, this brings some memories, back in the day, when we used to go out and stuff.
So it would be me standing in a corner, you on the dance floor. You were the one who said, right, if I've been invited to this party, I'm the one making the most of it. I'm like, yeah, I don't know him.
But yeah, I mean, it was like you said, they gave as good as they got, and fair play. You also mentioned Colby Parkinson, because that is what you want in the playoffs, right? You're gonna have a couple of players that are going to either cement themselves in the history books, right? They might not go into the Hall of Fame for like thousands of yards, and all pros and all of that, but you would always remember them because of the moment, and especially if that moment was significant, right? Everyone talks about Malcolm Butler, in the Patriots because of that moment, against the Seahawks in that Super Bowl. It's probably never going to go into the Hall of Fame, and no one's going to be remembering him for all his defensive plays, but making that one play that actually gets your team to win the Super Bowl is something that can do that. And maybe, for the Rams, Colby Parkinson can be that. He's not a much fancy tight end. Tyler Higbee is the typical, go-to tight end for the Rams. Mm-hmm. But to have a backup that can just sneak in and do something like that, no one would be looking at as a threat, in terms of coverage and all of that. So yeah, that was good, really good for him. Pleased for him.
Absolutely. Well, the Rams march on, the Panthers go home, but with their heads held high. Let's move on now to the next game. This was followed by an historic grudge match, which a divisional game, which you wouldn't normally see in the playoffs, but my God, the footballing gods gave us a good one here, didn't they? This was the Packers and the Bears. Now, I didn't stay up to watch this game, but I watched this game. I watched the highlights of this game the following morning without knowing the scores on YouTube. But what I did know is that I predicted that the Bears would win and that you predicted the Packers would win. Now, you said to me when I messaged you, said, I think the Bears will win. You went, oh, you're going against the Packers. They were your dark horses. I'm like, well, yeah, I just have a feeling that the Bears will do it. And after watching the highlights at halftime, I thought, what the bloody hell have I done here? Why did I go against the Packers? Clearly, that was hubris on my part. But no, this was the big comeback story of the weekend, with Chicago Bears erasing an 18-point deficit to beat their divisional rivals 31-27. And look, we can break this down, and we will do. But just in short, Eddie, when you have a big turnaround, a big comeback game like this, especially against a division rival, especially in the playoffs, what do you say? Do you say this is fantastic by Chicago, fantastic by Caleb Williams, what a comeback? Or do you look at it and think, Green Bay, what on earth were you doing? How did you let this slip? What side of the fence are you sitting on here?
It's Green Bay. What are you doing? Because you're not talking about a team who are, just struggle to get into the playoffs. You're not talking about a team that, doesn't know the other team very well. These are divisional opponents. And I think there's a real rivalry really brewing between these two teams right now. I know that, the Packers used to own the Bears, during Aaron Rodgers and all of that. But I think that we're going to see things like this, in seasons to come, because I don't know if you also heard about, Ben Johnson's rant when he was like, I effing hate those guys. Normally coaches don't say those sort of things, but, this is a real rivalry that is brewing, and Green Bay will feel absolutely sick into their stomach, because how do you allow 25 points in the fourth quarter? I mean, you're
crazy.
talking about, a game that you were comfortably going into the last 15 minutes of that game just to manage that game and go home with a victory. And then you allow them to score. That's the worst time for your offense to become inept. Because football, when the other team scores, they do give you the ball, right? It's not like as if when the Bears scored, they gave the Bears the ball and said, go ahead and score again. It meant that when they gave the ball to the Packers, they did absolutely nothing. And that has to be down to the offense. What are you doing? How do you take that ball and then don't control the clock, and you're sending your defense back out, again, without any rest, without anything, and it might be too easy to look at the defense and just say, oh, they got a problem. But if the defense is on the pitch most of the time, throughout the 15 minutes, which we know is never 15 minutes, but the whole fourth quarter, your defense is always there. At some point, you just cannot hold it together. And so Matt LaFleur is going to be looking at himself. He's the offensive mind, as a coach. He's not known for being a defensive-minded coach. So this is all on him. For me, it's Green Bay. How did you let this slip? How did you let the Bears get into it? And look, sometimes, football is about momentum, right? We see it in our game, right? So they say that 2-0 is like the worst scoreline in the football
dangerous
game.
Dangerous
scoreline, because all you need is that one goal. And if the goal comes just before halftime, it makes a huge difference. You can score, and if you're leading 2-0 in our football, and then someone scores just before halftime or immediately after halftime, that can just swing the whole energy, towards the team that has just scored the goal, even if they were outplayed completely in the first half. And that energy swung to the Bears, and they did not let it go. They just held on to that, and everyone played immense.
They did certainly in the fourth quarter. I mean, you talk about momentum. I think that there was a lot on the kickers. I think with momentum. Now, obviously, I think in the terms of the final score, it wouldn't have made a difference. But look, you're going into the fourth quarter. Bears are trailing 21-6 going into the fourth quarter. They get a field goal, 21-9. Yes, they finally get a touchdown. The extra point is good, 21-16. But they're still a good score behind. Green Bay then get a touchdown, but that extra point is missed. Yeah. Now, that means that they're leading by 9. But automatically, the momentum shifts because, again, 2 minutes later, Caleb Williams is driving them down. They get the touchdown and then a 2-point conversion. That's a 3-point swing by Green Bay missing a field goal and then Bears getting a 2-point conversion. That's basically a field goal they've made up, right? Yeah. And then that is the thing. And again, Caleb Williams was able to drive down again with 1:43 to get the to get that to get the final touchdown. 31-27 is how it ended. I mean, yeah, LaFleur would you say LaFleur's under pressure for his job now?
I think because of the structure of Green Bay, they're not like a traditional, sort of NFL team that has got like one owner, and it's like a fan-owned sort of team. He may be feeling the pressure, but I don't think that he will lose his job necessarily. He's been in the playoffs a lot of times, and I guess people can start creating the narrative of you're always getting into the playoffs as a 7th seed, because goodness me, they have been the 7th seed so many times that they've been in the playoffs, and usually they don't go any further than that. So people might start to think, are you just a regular season coach? And do you just not have it in the playoffs, other than when you play the Cowboys, which
well, yeah, but that's a walkover. It's a walkover. Yeah.
Every time someone plays the Cowboys, you know what's going to happen. But I think there will be questions that will be asked, whether he is someone that can actually take them, to the promised land. It's a tough one. I don't think he's on the hot seat because his play has not been under scrutiny over the season. Like everyone that has lost their job, at some point, people were really looking at them and saying, what are you doing as a head coach? Right. So I think if he loses his job, it will come out of left field, and it would be that the Packers have decided to go and get John Harbaugh.
Well, I was going to say that there's a big Harbaugh-shaped shadow looming over a lot, and that we haven't talked on McDaniels at Dolphins losing his job, but we haven't, because of various holidays and illnesses and stuff, we haven't been able to have a huge chat about that. But obviously there are a lot of coaches, there are a lot of organizations who don't have a head coach, and Harbaugh, everybody wants Harbaugh. And there may be a couple of people who might, because again, as a Dolphins fan, that's who I want as the head coach at Miami, because everybody does. But there may be organizations like a Green Bay, like Pittsburgh, if Pittsburgh go home today, who might be looking at it and saying, well, this guy's available, this guy's not often available. And you've seen, and we'll talk about them later, but you can see what a big head coach can change it. So you can see what change a proper experienced head coach can make. Because I just said, look at New England, look at Mike Vrabel, and see the change he's made. But let's park that there. I think we need to give some flowers and give some love to the Bears before we move on, because it was a rough first half. Even the first 3 quarters were rough, but Caleb Williams, did a fantastic job. Ben Johnson has done another good job. Head coach there just continues, and they marched on to divisionals. And who would have thought this beginning of the season? And fair play to him. Caleb Williams, who looked calm in key pressure moments. He's managing that drive further down. And this is the type of performance that the Chicago fans would have been hoping for from Caleb Williams. And was it a coming of age game for him, do you reckon, in the playoffs?
It was a coming of age, and people are already beginning to compare him with Patrick Mahomes, in terms of that fourth quarter comeback, because this is how Patrick Mahomes announced himself when he came into the NFL. So people are beginning to make those sharp comparisons, but and then you just need to calm down a little bit. Let's see what the young pup does, as he gets further into the postseason. But I think certainly, dare I say, he's probably going to be, for the first time in a long time, that number 1 pick that actually lives up to, his draft position. Probably, I'm trying to think, the last time one has really lived up, maybe it's Matthew Stafford, right? Because he was a number 1 pick, and of course he's won a Super Bowl, and of course he was getting all those crazy numbers when he was in Detroit before he moved over to the Rams. But I mean, people were talking about Caleb Williams and saying that he was, a generational talent. And then, last season, or certainly during the Matt Eberflus era, we're thinking, are you sure about that generational talent? But clearly, he's certainly winning a lot of people over. So I think this is going to do him a lot of confidence, the kind of games that they've had this season. And it's not even just about the wins, it's how they've been winning games. They're coming back, in the fourth quarter, going against teams that, normally the Bears would have struggled with, beating a lot of good teams on the way, to the postseason. And you're thinking to yourself, well, they beat Philly, they beat, the Vikings, they beat, obviously, they beat Dallas, and now, they've beaten a divisional rival that, you could argue, was right up there in terms of the talent that Green Bay has. And of course, people are going to say Green Bay had a lot of injuries, and they might be thinking what could have been if Micah Parsons didn't go down, right? Especially in that fourth quarter, that's when you need your pass rush, to come into the picture. So, yeah, I think, Caleb Williams has done very well for himself.
Absolutely. Fair play to him. And I think the Bears are going to be a dangerous team as we progress into divisionals next weekend. So let's move on. Let's switch back over to the AFC in probably what was maybe the game of the weekend. We've already talked about some fantastic games, but let's talk about the Buffalo Bills and the Jacksonville Jaguars. This going into many was a game that was too close to call. And again, that's just, testament to how well the Jacksonville Jaguars have done this season. Certainly since, I think it was ever since the London game. I mean, Eddie, you went to that London game, right? Where Jacksonville stunk the place out. You would not have thought that a few months later they are going to be in the playoffs, going proper tit for tat with the Buffalo Bills, who are many people's favorites still for the Super Bowl. This was an absolute barn of a game, proper like shootout football. You score, we score. You score, we score. But in the end, the difference maker was a certain Josh Allen. He was again he is. Look, the Bills aren't. I don't think the Bills are as strong a football team as they were the last couple of years.
Yeah,
but when they've got that 6'5" colossus holding the ball, running the plays down, they are in every game. I thought this was a fantastic game. I watched this one live. It was, the Bills just put it together when it mattered, and so much so that Jacksonville actually let them score their last touchdown.
Yeah,
just to give themselves a chance. But this is a fascinating game. Again, fair play to Jacksonville Jaguars. But how did you rate this one?
Listen, Josh Allen was under pressure. He was a huge pressure, and it wasn't pressure of the game in itself. It wasn't pressure of what was happening, but it's just pressure knowing that what's going to happen. And I think it kind of played in his mind. There's no question about it, because we're in a playoff world that there is no Patrick Mahomes, there is no Lamar Jackson, there is no Joe Burrow, right? And unquestionably, you are the best quarterback on that side of the conference. So, if you were going to go out in the very first game of the postseason, I think the ton of criticism that would have been on Josh Allen would have been absolutely ridiculous. People would have been asking him to give back his MVP award from last season. I think that's how bad it would have been. So I think there was pressure, on the Bills, because they had to have this game. And fair play, to the Jacksonville, they smell blood. they were like, hey, we can see some weaknesses here. We're not going to let you guys get off. We are literally going to go for it. And, the game was kind of, tilting a little bit in terms of aesthetics. Like when you're watching the game, you're kind of thinking, okay, it seemed like the Buffalo Bills were, sort of winning the aesthetic game, or easy on the eye sort of football. But make no mistake about it, this Jacksonville Jaguars came in with a game plan, to execute. And the difference in this game was the first drive, right? So the first drive, obviously the Jacksonville Jaguars, started this game. And that first drive, they drove all the way, towards the end zone. And they went for it and they didn't get it. And they turned over on downs, right? So in that first quarter, the Bills actually scored a 3 points field goal. And that, if you then looked at the scoring after that, because they were scoring the same amount of points all the way through all the quarters, from the second quarter to the end. And just the fact that the Jacksonville Jaguars didn't score in that first quarter turned out to be the difference in the whole game. And sometimes it's just crazy how football works, right? And people always say that when you're in the playoffs, every single play is important. The Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be thinking to themselves, should we have gone, for that, at that point in play, in the field? Could we? It was very early on in the game, so there was no, sort of jeopardy if you had taken the 3 points, right? At that time in the game, and you decided to go for it, trying to get a touchdown, and eventually turning it over on downs. And maybe that is the Josh Allen effect. Maybe that's the Bills effect, when you're thinking, what Patrick Mahomes used to do to teams, when teams are playing them, they're thinking, oh, we got to score touchdowns because you're not going to kick field goals and beat the Chiefs. And maybe that played in Jacksonville. And if there's any criticism of the Jaguars, it's that, in hindsight, they might have thought, hey, we could have taken that 3 points, because they matched the Bills stride for stride for the rest of the game. And that ultimately proved to be the difference.
Yeah, it did. And I think the hindsight is right. It's especially in that, that last play is, look, I know it's 1 yard, but I know it's 1 yard with a couple minutes on the clock, or a minute left on the clock, whatever it was. Do you back your defense to make the stop? But no, they just let Allen run for the 1 yard touch push, which, let's be honest, there was a strong possibility they were going to get that anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was but it was a touch push before they were. He carried it like 10 yards. I've never seen a touch push like it. They almost like picked up and carried him. It was absolutely insane. But
look, it did. That was amazing. That was quite a moment. Anyone that's talking about Josh Allen and being a superhero, that is the caption, to kind of use for that.
Yeah, sod all your 60-yard passes downfield, literally walking through 10 yards or whatever it was on a touch push. Yeah, it was incredible. But what I thought was telling was a lot of the commentators were saying that whoever wins this is going to be could be the favorite to go to the Super Bowl in the AFC. They were so impressed with the way the Jacksonville were playing, because they were going, tit for tat with probably the favorites. But look, as we talked about with Panthers, and we talked about it with the Bears as well, but obviously the Bears won. That I think Jacksonville can look at this and just think they'll be disappointed when they're out. It will hurt that the way that they went out basically a tipped interception right at the end when they were trying to get a scoring drive together. But this is an immense season for them. They've done incredible. They've done so well. Certainly the back half of the season. And if they can go into next season, they've got Trevor Lawrence, who after 5 years looks like the quarterback that they drafted. This is the type of stuff that they wanted. You talk about Caleb Williams, being a good first, probably being the best first round draft pick since Stafford. Trevor Lawrence still has, for me, all the attributes to do that. Whether he can do it at Jacksonville remains to be seen. This is a guy who's had a number of head coaches, number of different play patterns to learn, etc., etc., etc. But he's taken a team to Super Bowl, and I think they were unfortunate to come up against a Josh Allen-inspired Bills, who I still think are going to go to the Super Bowl in the AFC. So fair play to Jacksonville. just came up short, but they can reflect on a great season. But let's move on. It's been 35 minutes, and I've been holding back from this for a while now. Let's talk about your beloved Philadelphia Eagles. Last year's Super Bowl champions. They traveled to San Francisco, 49ers. Look, the Eagles feel like they've never really got going this season, and certainly on offense, but they were still a lot of people's favorites in the NFC to go back to the Super Bowl. But I know you're struggling to hide that smile. I can tell you're struggling to hide that smile. But the Eagles have been sent packing. The 49ers took this game 23-19. They had a really good balanced attack defense play, I think, over 49ers over the course of the game. But I'm just going to sit back and just let you wax lyrical, Eddie. I'm not going to contribute too much to this. I'll just let you run.
Listen, all through the season, I've been giving out money. I'm broke. I've been giving money to teams. Take out the Eagles. Told the Dallas Cowboys, go do it. They couldn't do it. Asked the Green Bay Packers, go do it. They couldn't do it. I sent the Bears. I said, hey, go take care of those guys. You're on the Bears. You got a good team, got an up-and-coming quarterback, got a good coach. Go take them out. Couldn't do it. But I always knew that my guy, Brock Purdy, was going to do it. He had revenge on his mind, right? Because the last time that they met in the postseason, those nasty Eagles took him out of the game. And, he slept. He said, look, listen, this football thing, I know how it is. What goes around comes around. And he just waited. He was like, I'm going to be patient. Just wait. I'm going to have my time. And boy, when he had his time, did he absolutely. This is the thing that I love about football, is that football has a way of punishing bad behavior. Because all throughout the whole season, the Philadelphia Eagles were playing terrible football. I mean, the offense was inconsistent. Are they going to throw to AJ Brown? What's happening with Saquon Barkley? What is Jalen Hurts doing? How do you disappear in games in the second half? Sometimes they are finishing a half of football with negative, yardage, and you're just thinking, what is going on? And I'm so, listen, I know, Eagles fans are gonna hate me. I'm probably gonna tune off now. All the Eagle fans that have been watching our show. I do apologize. I can't hide.
No, you don't. No, you're not apologizing.
But honestly, if there was a team that deserved to actually not get away with it's all about the wins, right? Because, all season people have been like, yeah, but they just win, right? We don't care how it looks. We don't care how we perform. We just win. And that game, for me, some flashes of Saquon Barkley, he broke into a run, every now and then. But the story is going to be AJ Brown, right? The story is going to be AJ Brown, the drop passes that he had. And listen, no matter how talented you are as a wide receiver, you're not immune from dropping passes. I mean, we saw CD Lamb, in the game against Philadelphia Eagles early on in the season, drop a couple of passes that, could have, actually propelled the Cowboys. You saw Josh Pickens, in the Detroit Lions game, drop a couple of passes. We've seen wide receivers drop passes, and it doesn't mean that they're not talented, but it's kind of like when you drop the passes, in what games that you do that. And all through the season, there's always been this tension about Jalen Hurts, and AJ Brown. And it's been like he's not getting the ball. They're not allowing him to actually help the team in the way that he's supposed to. And you just can't turn it off and turn it on, just the way that you think that you want in the postseason. And the defense, helped Philadelphia Eagles, because I think that if not for the defense, I think it could have been a much more bigger scoreline than it was, because the defense showed up a number of times to keep the 49ers at bay. And the funny thing about the whole 49ers thing was that you would have thought that the Eagles had the most talent in their own team. Like everyone in that Eagles offense line, you can probably mention their star players, Saquon Barkley, Devonta Smith, AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, but you'll be hard pressed to mention any stars in the 49ers defense, right?
Mhm.
I don't even know how many times they got to the quarterback in that game. For you to say that, the defense was absolutely terrorizing, Jalen Hurts. He was just playing badly. He will have time in the pocket, to stand and throw the ball, and then he would take off running, right? And just running into trouble. So, the Eagles, absolutely, for me, I think that in terms of being a complete team, the 49ers are a better representative, going further in the postseason, than a team that has just been sort of, finding a ways to win games, but not actually, playing very well. And it was only going to be a matter of time before it came by to bite them.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, we talked about the Kansas City Chiefs last year, sort of 1-0 to the Arsenal all the way to the Super Bowl, and where that bit there was in the Super Bowl. They ground out for most of the season. I think the Eagles, yeah, and I say this without meaning to be critical. They didn't have much competition in their division this year, did they?
No.
So they weren't. I don't think they were particularly challenged in their division. The playoffs almost became a given. Whereas you compare it to the 49ers, who had to scrap it out with the Rams, with the Seahawks, and it became a three-way battle to actually get to get seedings for the playoffs. And yeah, it hasn't looked right for a while. I know you're not Jalen Hurts' biggest fan, but yeah, that just kind of struggled at the end, and I think that if things were beginning to bubble over, you mentioned AJ Brown, but Nick Sirianni running down the touchline to have a go at him after another drop catch. I mean, the commentator, again, I can't remember who it was, or one of the analysts was saying, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Love to see it. Two passionate guys." I'm like, personally, I don't like seeing that. Yeah, let it. If Sirianni is annoyed at him, call him out in the changing room, right? But don't do it in front of the whole country or the whole world is watching. Is that going to pump Brown up, or is it just going to piss him off? But yeah, ultimately, you're right. I mean, I think the 49ers, I don't think they've sparkled or been spectacular this season, but I think they've been an all-round better team than the Eagles. And I think a lot of the Eagles chickens came home to roost in this game. And yeah, the Super Bowl champs are out, and I know you are devastated.
I am, I poured a cup, in commiserations, for the Eagles yesterday. And you know what was what I liked, the petty, I always like a bit of petty in football. When the 49ers did the trick play, and gave it to Joan Jennings, and then he threw it for McCaffrey, and I was like, "Ooh, this is petty," because the Philadelphia have got the Philly specials, right? That they pull out every now and then, where they would reverse the pass and throw it. Normally, it goes to the quarterback, and then the quarterback scores. But to see the 49ers do a trick play, on the Eagles. They need to find a fancy name for what they did, because the Philly has got the tush push, and then they've got the Philly special. Maybe the 49ers can find something to call that play. But I do like a bit of petty football whenever it happens.
How about the sassy bitch play? How about that?
I like
it. There we go. I think we're wasted on YouTube, mate.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to the final game, and I don't think there's much to really talk about on this one. The Chargers and the Patriots. I don't think I've ever been as bored of watching a playoff game highlights than I was watching this one. And look, I mean, I say a lot of this in jest. I'm a Dolphins fan. I'm not supposed to like the Patriots, but this wasn't a fun game to watch. But right. Looking at it from a negative side, it was dull. We didn't get a touchdown to the fourth quarter. I think that from a Chargers perspective, they'll be disappointed. Offense never really got going. They didn't protect. Oh my God, his name escapes me. Quarterback
Justin Herbert.
Herbert, thank you. They didn't protect Herbert well enough at all in the game, and the Patriots just did enough to win. Right, so that's a negative side. If I was to flip it, look at the positive side. The Patriots defense dominated that game, right? And we talk about defenses win championship, and that was a defensive play that made me think that the Patriots could go on not only to Super Bowl but to win, because their defense dominated. They strangled Herbert. They broke through. They rushed through so many times, put him under pressure, and they Chargers could not get anything going. And on the other side, you just got Drake May, who is the personification of efficient at the moment. Not spectacular, but efficient. Got things rolling and took their opportunity when they can, and the Patriots advance. I mean, not really a huge amount to say about this game, other than the fact it was 16-3, which kind of says it all compared to all the games we've just been talking about today.
Yeah, it was a snooze fest. It was that kind of game where if you love defense, this is like, what they say when you have a 0-0 game and you're just like, there are some, exciting 0-0s, and there are some boring 0-0s. This one was more of the latter. It was a struggle for the quarterback. It looked like, Justin Herbert just never had enough time to settle in. And we've said this before, that no matter how good a quarterback you are, if you get having to pick yourself up from the floor every single time, after a while, it's just going to, like, at some point, you're just going to start seeing, ghosts. You're going to start feeling pressure every time there is none. And no quarterback can consistently play well, getting sacked, getting pressured on, getting hit, time after time. And those New England Patriots defenders made sure Justin Herbert knew that he was in the game. He's going to be waking up with all kinds of pains from parts of his body that he didn't know even existed, because of the amount of punishment that he got in that game. I mean, that was what that game was. It was like, this game is going to get close until whoever scores a touchdown might win this game. And Drake May, scored that late touchdown, and that turned out to be the difference in the game. Other than that, it was a pretty, uneventful game. The first quarter, you could have gone to bed, and just like, forgotten about the game because there was nothing to be seen. And thank goodness this game was a very late one for us in the UK. Because imagine if this was the early game to like start the wildcard game. I don't think even the NFL would have been, pleased to have that kind of product, as the first game, because people would have maybe switched off and not watched the rest of the games. But it was a very late one, uneventful quarters, and then yeah, to actually not score any points in the second half, shut a team down completely. That is going to be saying something. And this was a Chargers team that, we're not doing bad in the regular season. They were putting up points. Usually they would be averaging about 20 points in the game. I think they had, 2 games where they didn't break that 20 points barrier. And one of them was against a good defense. So maybe that was a sign of things to come when they played Denver. and they lost, and I think the scoreline was actually quite very similar. They lost 19-3 in that game, so they do have some form in terms of just scoring 3 points. Maybe that was a view into the future. If they come up against good, proper defense, not like the Cowboys defense that they had their way with, but if they come up against proper defense, maybe they really struggle. And maybe that in itself might give some hope that the Patriots might play better football in the next round, in the divisional round, and they're going to play the winners of either the Texans or the Steelers. And if it is the Texans, that's again another good defense. So maybe we might not be getting that. We might be getting another low-scoring game in the divisional round. But hey, I think the Jaguars, they've done well for themselves, but at some point, people are going to start asking the question about Justin Herbert, because I'm tired, of people. Every time they talk about top 5 quarterbacks, they put Justin Herbert in that list, right? And it's like, what has he done? He's not won any playoffs. He's not been to the playoffs a lot of times, and the time that he's been to the playoffs, he's not done anything. So how is he still one of the top best 5 quarterbacks, in the NFL? So, and it's been here long enough. So it's not like he's a second year, third year quarterback, and you're like, okay, he's still going to come good. But he doesn't get as much criticism, as, some quarterbacks that I think, no matter what they do, they're probably going to get as much criticism. And, we're probably, one of them didn't play, in this round. We're probably going to talk about him when we do our prediction with Sam Darnold. But, it kind of shows the contrast between, someone who's been almost anointed as a golden child, golden quarterback, gets all the praise no matter what he does. And then there are other people that have to scrap to just get any kind of recognition whatsoever.
No, absolutely. And look, I'm sure we can fantasy trade quite a few people, but sometimes quarterbacks with all the potential, sometimes they still have to move on to fulfill that potential. You look at Matthew Stafford as a good example. At the Lions for many years, couldn't get it done, but now he's moved to the Rams and he's potentially going to have more success with the Rams that he had in Detroit. You look at some quarterbacks like Rivers, sometimes there may be a trade further down the line if there's potential to win a Super Bowl. But I think we don't need to talk too much more about that game. I think we've done it, and I think we've reviewed everything we want to review. But at the end of every one of these recaps, I am going to ask you the question: who do you think is going to the Super Bowl now, based on what we've seen in Wildcard Weekend? Forgetting the fact we haven't seen Denver, we haven't seen Seattle, and so far we haven't seen Houston and Pittsburgh. So a few caveats there, but based on what you've seen, who are your 2 Super Bowl contenders?
See, that game against the Panthers and the Rams, kind of puts a bit of doubt in the Rams for me, because if you play that close to certain other teams, you could lose, right? And it took a play, to stop them from losing that game against the Panthers. And I'm kind of thinking about, the teams that are left, for them to play, the 49ers, who are a team that they're going to be very familiar with if they do meet them. You've also got the Seahawks, a team that they're also, very familiar with.
Well, so yeah, I mean, so just for some context, you've got in the division round, you've got the Rams will play the Bears and the Seahawks will play the 49ers, right? So you've got 3 teams in the NFC West left, and then the Bears keeping them company as well. So don't know if that changes your view at all.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you see what the Bears did. I don't know if I want to pick against the Bears, anymore. And the Rams have to go to the Bears because obviously the Bears won their division. So they're gonna have home field advantage. And
it will be cold.
It will be cold. And what do they say about hot weather teams?
They say, "Hello, Miami. How are you? How are you doing?"
I mean, tell me how you're doing. Okay, all right. I've been stalling enough.
You have.
For this, so I'm gonna stick with the Rams. In the NFC. To get to the Super Bowl, but only just. And I'm going to stick with the Bills because I just think that Josh Allen has got to do it. This is the chance for him to do it.
Yeah, I think I've said those two for a while, and I'm not going to change any different. For this, when it comes to predictions, and I've had some time to think about it and read things from people cleverer than me, I might change. Yeah, I'm still saying the Rams and the Bills so far. It'll be interesting. Seattle, the Rams and the Bears is going to be so hard to call. I can see another shootout there.
Yeah.
But then it's in the AFC. It's the defenses. If Texans get through tonight, their defense has been so good. They are the dark horse, I think, at the moment because they're just defending so well. But can they get past Pittsburgh? And they've got Patriots who again will just, if they can put the type of pressure on that they did against the Chargers. You've seen Allen. I mean, Allen did really well, but he was banged up in that first half, wasn't he?
He was,
hyperextended the knee, hurt his hand, knocked his head. So who knows? He's definitely. I mean, look, nobody's fighting fit in the playoffs, but it's the playoffs. You just get to get through it. Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see in what condition Allen is, depending on who they play. But look, let's wrap it up for us. I think that was the Wildcard Weekend. And as I said at the beginning, it was wild, as you'd expect. But we will be back later on this week to give you our predictions for the divisional game and give you a review on the Houston-Pittsburgh game as well. But we will be back next week as well to give our review. But for now, please, Eddie, as always, take us home.
Yeah, so that was the Wildcard Weekend. Some teams survived, some teams got exposed, and the whole league is getting quieter. It's kind of like, after all the party and enjoyment, everyone is now going home. And you've got all the people who have had a little bit too much to drink, trying to figure out where the light switch is, to switch the lights off and then, finally put it to bed. But it's going to feel like that for a lot of teams after each round of the playoffs. But hey, we're going to be breaking it all down as well. So look out for our previews of the divisional game, as well. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And do let us know what you think about the Wildcard Weekend and just help us share this content with as many people as possible. And until the next one, we'll see you across the gridiron.
I'm the bad guy. I'm the